Hi everybody, welcome to another RC video. Today we're going to talk about 3D printing and how to design something like this, which is a receiver mount and an antenna tube holder. And the reason I thought about building this for my cars is the B74.1 and the B74 both don't come with an antenna tube holder. So the new Sanwa receivers have an antenna, and you know, some of the older ones like this SR410 from Spectrum also just have a long antenna that you need to mount somewhere in your car. So usually what I end up doing is just kind of wrapping it up and putting it with the other wires in the car and calling it good. Well, this time I wanted to come up with something that would look cool, and I remembered a few years back when I had a D413, a hot body D413, and that car came with something similar to this. I always liked that because it gave you options on where you could put your receiver. You could put your receiver pretty much anywhere in the car. So I thought, why not make one of these for use on my current cars also, because I have these receivers that require a short antenna tube. Okay, so let's jump into Blender and I'll show you how to design something like this part using Blender's interface. And then after that, we'll jump into Chitubox and show you how to design the supports for printing. Okay, I've started up Blender here, and let's go ahead and build a receiver plate. One of the things we need to do to Blender is change it from Blender units to the metric system. And you can do that by going into Scene Properties, selecting Units, and then changing the unit system from none to metric. And we're going to be dealing with millimeters, so I want everything in Blender to show in millimeters. So my unit scale is going to be 0.001, and my length is going to be millimeters. The other thing I want to do is show the grid scaled to millimeters, so I'm going to go to the Overlays tab here and select grid scale to be 0.001. And now every square on the grid is going to be 1 millimeter. So let's go into top view here and delete the cube. Go add a circle, and I'm just going to make the circle be a radius of 5 millimeters. And this is going to give us the edges of our receiver plate. So then let's go ahead and add a template here for the actual receiver plate, and I know I want it to be 22 by 22 millimeter square, so just say 22, and there's our template. So one quick way I can get around modeling everything on this plate is just by modeling a quarter of it and having it mirror the other side. So I'm going to delete everything but this quarter using the X key and then selecting vertices, and then I'm going to go down here to modifiers and select the mirror modifier and do mirroring on both the X and the Y axis. So that allows me to, if I move something over here, it's going to move it on both the X and the Y. The other thing I'd like to do is turn on clipping. That way when I move things around, I can't move past into the other regions of the mirror. So let's just drag this up, and it's looking pretty good about there. So you can move vertices by just hitting the G key and dragging your mouse around. So when you hit the G key, the vertices will connect to your mouse like that. And if you hold down Shift, it will move them slower than what your mouse is moving. So that's helpful for doing some fine-tuning of where you want the vertices to go. Okay, that's looking pretty good, so I can go ahead and delete my template. And then I want to have this to have a face, so I'm going to extrude out some vertices here just by hitting the X or the E key, and then do G and X, get it into the center. So now I select all my vertices and just hit F, which puts a face on them. So there's our plate. Now we need to have some length, and I want it to be about 2 millimeters. So one thing that you can do to help you figure out where 2 millimeters is, click on the overlay here and then select edge length. And then you can, when you extrude, you can see that's 1 millimeter and that's 2 millimeters. And it's going to be showing you the lengths for everything that it's selected. So if I switch between vertex, edge, and face mode by holding Control and hitting Tab, and then just select an edge, you see that it's giving me the measurement for 11 millimeters on both edges. Okay, so that's our plate. That's pretty straightforward. Now let's go ahead and build the antenna tube. So what I'm going to do is snap my cursor to the edge here by holding down Shift and hitting S and doing snap cursor to selected. And then go back into top view by pressing 7 on the number pad and do Shift A and circle. And my antenna tube, I want the resolution to be a little bit higher, so I'm going to do 100 vertices. And I know the radius is going to be 1.65 millimeters. Kind of played around with this a little bit to determine that. And I'm going to turn off the edge lengths for now. Okay, so let's go ahead and move this up a little bit. I want this circle to be separate. So I'm going to select it and then just hit the P key so that it's separate by itself. There we go. So now we have the antenna tube and the plate itself. And now's a good time to kind of modify our hierarchy here a little bit. So I want to call this plate, and I want to call this antenna tube. And I don't need the mirror modifier for the antenna tube, so I can just delete it. Okay. So the walls of the antenna tube, I'm going to go ahead and extrude out by selecting all vertices in the object, and then hitting the E key, and that attaches the vertices to the mouse. And you can right click to detach them, and then I'm just going to scale them to 2 millimeters like that. Okay, so now we'll just extrude up, and I want it to be about 11 millimeters or 12 millimeters tall. So hit the E key again, and I'm going to hold down the Control key so that it snaps to the grid, and we'll go all the way up to the top. If you see in the bottom here, it's actually showing you the number of millimeters that it's extruding up. Okay, and so there's our antenna tube. So these are some pretty basic shapes. Just move that up a little bit. Now one thing I want to do is connect the antenna tube to the plate by using just a couple of faces here. So I'm going to go into face select mode. Again, that's Control Tab and then select face, and then right click on my face and extrude that out, and just extrude that out 2 millimeters, and then select this face and extrude it out almost all the way to the top. So you'll see it's extruding them on the other side too. Once we're done with this side, we'll turn off mirror mode and then just delete those because we don't need those on that side. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of contour to this part. So I'm going to create some edge loops by hitting Control R, and then wheel mouse up a few times and then click, and that's going to give us some edge loops. And then we can just I'm just going to kind of round off this side of it here. So a couple ways you can move this edge. You can either type G twice, and then it will move on the nearest plane, I'm gonna do it by hitting the G key, which is initiates move, and then just typing X, which means it's just moving it on the X-axis. So I want it about there, and I'm gonna move some more in here, just like that. Cool. Alright, so the other feature I want to have is the ability to run the wire into the bottom of the antenna tube. And so in order to do that, I'm going to select vertice in the bottom and then just snap the cursor to the grid, or cursor to that vertice. And let's go ahead and create a cube. And that's going to be a 2x2 millimeter cube. I'm going to scale it up a little bit so that it's taller. And we'll have this right about here. Just like that. So I'm going in top view, scale it a little bit more so that it cuts all the way through the tube. And what this is going to be is like a template to cut into our tube here. So rename this to cut, and then in order to cut this out, what I'm going to do is add a modifier onto our antenna tube called Boolean, and I'm going to select my cut, and that's it. So if I go into local view by hitting the / on the numpad, you can see that the antenna tube now has a little cut for where the wire can go. And so once I like that, I can just click on apply here, this drop down, and then I can delete this cube by hitting the X key and then just hitting enter. Alright, so I think the only other thing I want to do is put a little cap on the bottom of this so that the antenna tube has something to rest on if it goes all the way down, instead of like hitting the chassis, for example. So what I'm going to do is just I'm going to edge select this ring by holding the Alt key and Shift and right clicking on that edge, and what that did is it just selected that edge alone. I'm going to extrude that down, and make sure that it's not pointing out there, and then I'm just going to hit F to create faces on it, and then do the same thing for the inside. So Alt Shift right click on that edge loop. It may not let me do that. There we go, right there. Perfect. And then just hit a F so we got a face in there too. Okay. Cool. And on the top, I'm going to do a loop cut here by doing Control R again and go into face mode, and I'm just going to raise this up a little bit so it's got a little bit of a beveled edge on the top of it. Okay, so let's take care of this mirroring. Go ahead and apply that mirroring and go into top view, go into face mode, and I'm just going to select these faces and hit the X key to delete them, and I want to delete faces. And then we have an open part now on our model, which we don't want because 3D printing requires us to have an airtight model. So I'm going to select these edges and hit F to create faces. And there you have it. That's it for the Blender part. The only other thing I need to do is save my model and export it out to STL. Okay, so I've saved my blend file as receiver mount.blend, and the 3D printing software doesn't know what a Blender file is, so we have to export this into an STL or an OBJ. And before we do that, we just want to make sure that things are going to go smoothly. So what I like to do is select everything that I'm going to export and then click on Object, Apply, All Transformations. So what that does is it applies any scaling or rotations to the object so that it's good to go. And then the other thing too is Blender, sometimes when you're creating faces on vertices, it will flip the face normal to point on the inside of the object rather than on the outside of the object. So you can tell Blender to show you that by clicking on the overlay and then selecting face orientation. So you can see here I've got most of my models in blue, which is good, but then I have this face here that's in red. So I want to flip that so that it's working correctly. So in order to do that, I can just go into edit mode, select all by double tapping A and then holding down Control and typing N, and that recalculates the face normals back to the inside, the direction that they want. So now that that's done, I think I'm ready to export. I'm going to select both my objects again and then do File, Export, STL, Receiver Mount, STL. Make sure that you have selection only turned on because I'm only exporting these two objects. And also keep the scale as default of 1. And then click Export. Okay, so now that it's exported, we can go ahead and load up the 3D printing software and show you how that works. Okay, so I use a tool called Chitubox for printing on my printer. And I'm going to click on the open file here and just select my receiver mount, and it's going to drop it onto the grid here, which represents the build plate of the printer. And one thing I like to do is rotate my object a little bit so that's not printing directly on the build plate, and then makes it hard to kind of peel off the build plate. So I'm going to rotate this a little bit like that. And then I'm going to build some supports for it. And you see it moved up the Z height to 4 millimeters, which is fine. And then I'm going to create a platform of supports for it. And so this is how the object is going to print on the printer. And I'm liking how this looks. Some people spend a lot of time creating supports, and you can really, this is kind of an art to create supports, but for this simple piece we're just gonna go ahead and let it automatically create them. So once you're happy with the supports, go back over to the settings and then just type slice, and then if you scroll through here you can see the printer is going to start with the build plate at the top, so it's going to start with this and just slowly build out the object like that until it's done. So I'm going to save this onto my flash drive and then go over to my printer and start printing it out. With resin printing, there's some precautions that you have to make. For example, you want to always wear rubber gloves whenever you're dealing with parts that are not cured. The resin will burn your hands and your skin. So you want to be careful and just use precaution, eye protection also. You want to cure your prints in either a UV, some sort of UV light, or just put them out in the sun and make sure they cure thoroughly. And here you can see the part now is mounted up into my B74. It's kind of buried in here with some other wires. And what's nice is I can put my body on top of this and the antenna tube will just go sort of inside where the cab is. I probably could have lengthened the antenna tube maybe a little bit, but I wasn't sure how much it would clear the body. So this is working pretty good, and I'm pretty happy with the result. If you like this video, please make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more RC content. We'll see you in the next video.